Thank you very much. Good morning, afternoon, evening to everyone. I see from the chat we have many colleagues joining us from around the world. It's so wonderful to see so many people here from so many different locations. Let's jump into this little topic. So as Melissa mentioned, I work in issues around gender. I often think myself as not really being a traditional ELT teacher. My background and training was not initially in ELT. I came through the fields of politics and law to end up in language teaching. So I maintain that interest in gender and human rights, which is what brings us to CEDAW today. Some of you filled in a survey beforehand, and we're going to take a look at that data to begin with. And then we're going to move through to look at what is CEDAW, what are the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations, the importance of educating women, how women are showed in textbooks, and what some of the implications are for us as ELT teachers. So first of all, thank you to everyone who had the chance to fill in the survey. This data I pulled about an hour ago, so I might have missed some of you. Apologies if I did. It seems the majority of you haven't encountered CEDAW before, which is pretty much what I expected. It's not something we often hear about in language teaching. This is a United Nations protocol effectively, so it doesn't come up that much. CEDAW is actually a convention that aims to protect and advance women's rights, and we're going to look at that in a little more detail shortly. But I was very curious about how much training you've received around gender equality. And we see in both pre-service and as part of your ongoing CPD that the majority of you have not had the chance to engage in any training or input sessions around gender equality. I can understand that it's often, again, not a thing that comes up in pre-service training. We're often very focused on pedagogical methods and trying to get people just to be the best teacher they can. And some of these pastoral issues fall by the side. I'm a little more surprised to see so few of you have had a chance while in training and while in employment. I'd be really interested to hear in the chat actually maybe what barriers you have to that. I might be able to check the answers now, but I will definitely come back to those later. I'm assuming those of you who are here are actually all interested in the topic, so I'm really glad to be able to give you this opportunity to at least have some gender equality CPD today. I was really curious as well what your opinion was on textbooks and how they depict men and women. So my concern is with the equality and the ratio of our depictions. So just over a quarter of you found that your textbooks you were working with were balanced, whereas the majority found that men were more represented in books. And this is something that we see across the globe and comes up a lot in repeated surveys. And we're going to take a look at this later also. I'm very excited for the 30% of you who have more women in your textbooks. I want to know what those books are. They sound like great books that we all need to be teaching. My other curiosity was around how supportive your institutions are. And this was very interesting, almost a perfect third split in every direction. So some institutions could take it or leave it, not that interested either way. 30% of you are saying you don't have supportive institutions. And I wonder if that's just their not interested or if they're actively against it. And that could be a very important consideration that perhaps we can talk about at the end of the session as well. But then 35% of you having really supportive, positive institutions who promote equality. I'm delighted to see that, and I'm really pleased that you get to work in such a wonderful, supportive environment as that. Let's take a look at this CEDAW acronym now. CEDAW stands for the Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, but we also use it to stand for the Convention. The Convention is a 30-article document with a preamble from the United Nations, work for which began in around 1946. And the Convention itself was adopted in 1979, but not fully enacted until 2 years later after the 20th country had signed the accord. CEDAW's main aim is to tackle any form of discrimination against women. That might be sex-based, political, cultural, religious, any discrimination that impacts women and girls. So the purpose of tackling this discrimination is in order to advance women's place. It seeks to guarantee human rights for women to the extent of basic and fundamental freedoms that we might not otherwise enjoy. And this feeds into things such as access to education, access to healthcare, access to the political sphere. And it pushes for these spheres to be equally available to men and women, so that there is actually no distinction between the roles of those genders within a society. So CEDAW is an overarching agreement, and it's not something that we necessarily interact with deeply, but it does feed into a lot of human rights policy, which sometimes feeds into educational policy. What we find is something that we can work on more in the classroom are sustainable development goals. So the UN's development goals started in the year 2000. They set 8 Millennium Development Goals with targets for 2015. When these targets were mostly met, they were pretty successful. The United Nations decided in the autumn of that year to then enact another set of development goals, only this time they expanded to 17. And these were not short term, they were looking at obtaining sustainable progress that could be maintained within a certain period. So we were looking here from between 2015 onwards, going towards around 2030 is pretty much the timeline for achieving the goals set out. And in teaching, and particularly in ELT, we have 2 highly relevant goals, the 4th and the 5th. Goal 4 is aimed at quality education. So by 2030, the UN suggests that all nations should ensure equal access for men and women to quality education from primary through to university level. It has to be affordable, sustainable, and practically applicable. They also want to increase vocational skills within youth so that people are training not just for academic purposes, but for jobs that will allow them to then go on and sustain themselves. So this includes things like plumbing, etc., very practical manual jobs. The creation of educational facilities is also really important. It's all very well to say we need women in education, we need education from primary to tertiary level, But if we don't have a place in order for the education to happen, that's not going to succeed. So the development and the repair of educational facilities that are suitable for children, for adults, for those with disabilities, that are safe, appropriate, well-planned spaces, which can be inclusive and conducive to learning, are a requirement of this goal. I think by 2030, we require more teachers. So if we want more education, we need more educators, which in turn needs more training. So this is a very much trickle-down effect. This goal pushes countries to better train their teachers so that their teachers can then educate the population. So we're looking at more teachers, better teachers, teachers with access to international projects, focusing on training in developing nations where opportunities might otherwise be lacking, particularly focusing on the most underdeveloped countries. And goal 5 focuses on gender equality. The first aim is very much in line with CEDAW, end discrimination. That is its primary aim. But as part of that, the goal seeks to ensure that women are full participants in social and civil life, that they can be engaged in the political and economic spheres, that they have opportunities for leadership, and they're engaged in the decision-making processes of the organizations that they're involved in, and within the running of their own country through the parliamentary system. So that sounds really positive, but let's take a look at some not so delightful facts here. In 2016, UNICEF found that a large number of children of school age, and this is primary through secondary school, were out of education for one reason or another. So this might be due to poverty, due to girls not being educated traditionally within certain cultures. It might be due to remote locations and a lack of access to schools. It might be due to illness and disability, and there not being the appropriate facilities for them to be educated in. But 61 million girls globally are receiving no education. In 2021, UN research found that nearly a fifth of young women were married before the age of 18. And as someone who teaches university students, I can't imagine a fifth of the women in my classes being married. I certainly couldn't imagine being married at that age. And this is a depressing fact, not just because it relates into the idea of child marriage, which is also a barrier to education, but because often when women get married, they withdraw from any education that they're in. So if we break this fact down a little bit more, in Southern Asia, 28% of young women were married in childhood, and in Sub-Saharan Africa, figures found that 35% of women were married in childhood. Childhood here is going into the teenage years. We're not necessarily talking about particularly young children, but still people who have not yet reached adulthood. There is a little bit of good news thrown in here, though. Global prevalence of child marriage is declining. We've had a 10% drop over the last 5 years, which hopefully will drop a little bit more. But if we look at leadership issues, we see women are only just over a quarter of the politicians in lower and single houses of national parliaments. So if we take a look at this infographic from the UN, we see here that it will take us 40 years for women and men to be equally represented in parliaments if we carry on at the pace we are. Now, 40 years ago puts us in the early 1980s. If we think about how much has changed otherwise since then, yet we still don't have this position of women's advancement in politics. And we think about how much is going to change another 40 years into the future. If we carry on at that rate, I'm actually not sure we'd get there. There is a possibility we would stall and be highly advanced in other things and still not having women be able to raise their voice within politics. Another unfortunate survey, which is unfortunate data that unfortunately I think people will know well, is that 1 in 4 women who have ever been in a relationship, in this case women, was counted to be females over the age of 15. Quarter of people in that demographic have at some point experienced intimate partner violence on at least one occasion. This doesn't count for women with multiple experiences or with multiple abusive partners. And somewhat related to this, we see that only 57% of women of reproductive age, this is cisgendered women for this study, are making reproductive choices and decisions around their own sexual health. We see that this study here, this data was conducted over 14 years of data collection in 64 countries. That's a lot of women still not making their choices. So why does any of this actually matter? What is the importance of educating women and girls? Educating women and girls is magic. Magical, amazing things happen when we educate women and girls. We get immensely improved societies. We see vast social change far beyond the simple changes we're making in educational policy. Economies improve. This is one of the big driving forces for getting politicians to sit up and pay attention to educating women. Economies that don't educate women or girls find themselves roughly $1 billion worse off in GDP than countries that do educate girls at least to primary level. We're not talking tertiary education here, we're talking basic education, and that makes a fundamental difference to the country. So how does this work? Firstly, it helps break the poverty cycle. Once women are better educated, they're able to get better jobs, more stable jobs, jobs that are salaried. So of course, we're going to have more income coming in, but that's going to give them better options as well. The more skills you have, the better jobs you have, the more money you're taking home in your pocket. And that gives women an immense amount of freedom. That gives them freedom to do things like escape those abusive relationships where otherwise they might remain financially trapped. It gives them the confidence to step out on their own and seek opportunities outside of the home in societies where traditionally they might have been raised to be homemakers only. Education will also help save lives. So with that money comes freedom, and that brings along with it the freedom to make decisions about that sexual health, where 40+% of women are still not getting any say. So we see when women are better educated, infant mortality decreases. There's a significant fall in deaths in childhood before the age of 5 years. 50% more babies are likely to survive to literate women than illiterate women. Because women are better able to make decisions about their own body with education, in particular literacy and access to materials, we also see a decrease in teen pregnancy and a decrease in child marriage. So women are therefore more able to continue in education. They're not being removed from education because the people that might otherwise remove them are learning different ways of being agents of society and enacting change. And this is one of those filter down effects. Once people know more and know better, they can do better. So once people learn about the harms and learn about what's otherwise available, they're able to take those routes. So we talk about how much child marriage is impacted by education. The UN states in 18 out of the 20 countries with the highest prevalence of child marriage, girls with zero education are 6 times more likely to marry as children or be forced to marry as children than children with as much as a secondary education. Again, we're talking very basic education up to the age of 16, 18. Okay. So let's say we've got women into our classrooms. That's not our problem right now. We have women in our classroom, we give them a textbook. As a lot of you stated in the pre-survey, there's not an equal representation within those books. Kocaman and Selvi ran a study in Turkey, and here they looked at locally produced materials that were designed for a university preparatory program for sort of 17 to 20-year-olds, roughly. In their analysis, they also found that men were more visible in every single occupation. That is, paid occupations outside the home. When it came to family jobs and roles, women were more prevalent. But if there was a salary there, it was going to the men. This varied by type of industry and profession. But what we saw in this research was that there's a ratio of 5-to-1 men to women in fields related to STEM and law. So very much high-powered jobs are disproportionately shown to be belonging to men. And within all of the jobs that people were shown as having, men's jobs were much more varied and interesting, even within a given industry. Whereas women's were very simple, very elementary jobs within a particular industry. They also looked at how men and women are portrayed within these textbooks, not just in the roles they have, but in how they're discussed and considered. They found that women were emotional and also very domesticated. We apparently spend a lot of time having emotions at home. Men, however, were strong and they were out doing exciting things like playing sports and having a life. There was this massive contrast that men were active outside the home and women were active inside. And there wasn't really any crossover. The thing is, Kocaman and Selvi are not the only people who found similar results. Here we have a summary of research. This is all from the first 10 years of the 2000s, but not much has changed. And you'll see here we have a lot of countries considered: Iran, Japan, Turkey, Kenya, Jordan, Tanzania, and a few global overviews. Every single one of these studies found, in one way or another, men were presented more frequently, more actively, and of higher status than women. So this would vary in a few ways. So we might see that there's more men visually represented or more characters created in the books are men. We might see that men take more of the speech in a conversation or in even like a lecture or presentation. We see again that men have higher status roles. But I think my favorite is this study from Japan that says 80% of stories present women as not just emotional, but now we're also foolish, whereas men have self-control. And there's no good reason for this to be the case. We know that the population is pretty much equally split. We know that in a lot of the countries represented in these textbooks, because a lot of them are very Western, that employment levels are pretty similar. So there seems to be some unconscious bias here on the part of writers and publishers. So, okay. Still, what has this got to do with ELT? The poor women that are subject to dealing with these textbooks where they're told they're over-emotional and don't have any good jobs are learning for very particular reasons. They're often learning for growth, to empower themselves. Generally, we know people learning ELT are learning with a particular motivation. But that motivation might also be an investment for these people. Bonnie Norton talked way back in the mid-90s about how motivation is sometimes not enough. We have our intrinsic and external motivations. But what we actually need for really good learning is this deep intention and investment in it. And that's when we see things like women learning for safety. Women are learning, they're coming to English classrooms because they know it's going to buy them that financial freedom. We know it's going to buy them routes out of problems and difficulty. We know it's going to give them better, stronger, stable futures. So their investment in the target language actually becomes an investment in themselves and the cultivation of their social identity. We also see migrant women and refugee women learning languages either to survive or to assist their children. So studies from around 2015 show that between 40 and 50% of refugees arriving in an English-speaking country don't speak any English, whereas only around 15 or 20% feel they have a good level of English. These are self-declared results. That's a lot of people who need to learn language to survive. When it comes to children, nearly 90% of children who move to an English-speaking country before the age of 5 then adopt English as their first language, regardless of what is being spoken at home. And that's the language that they might also speak at home with their parents, depending on how much access their parents have had. And this, of course, does depend on ESOL funding. We know a lot of ESOL funding programs for migrants are being cut globally, but where funding is available, these are often the motivations we see for learning. So what can we do about all of this? How can we empower these women? First of all, we need to look at diversifying our materials. If we're not seeing representation of women in materials, we need to create them. Those busy teachers, we don't always have the time for this. But often a quick Google can get you a vaguely decent photo that's a little more balanced than perhaps what the book is offering. So related to this is encouraging critical thinking. Encourage your learners to talk about why are women being portrayed in this way? What is the writer's purpose of it? What is the point of showing men to be stronger, women to be domestic? Ask them to think critically about the ideas that are presented. So if women are being shown as emotional, okay, first of all, do we think this woman is emotional? Why and why not, right? And why might she be being shown that way? Is it someone relying on a stereotype, or is she actually having a genuine feeling about the situation that's happening in that scenario? Discussion is also a great tool, and this is something that you can go on to from critical thinking. So discuss issues around women's wants and needs. That means asking your learners what they want. Hopefully, we've all got some time to sit down and get a good class profile and do a needs analysis. If not, though, most intake forms have some needs analysis component, even if we can't do it ourselves. So figure out why your learners are there. What is their motivation for learning? And what do they need from that learning? Do they need purely survival English? Do they need English to get them into an industry? Do they need English for advancement within an industry? Are they learning to help their children get on with their homework because their children have gone into an English language speaking school and they don't have any skills to support them? And then while we're discussing them, hand the floor over to women. Let women lead this conversation. No one is better placed to tell you what they want than the person that wants and needs it. As much as we need men in education to be strong allies and stand with us, the discussion for what women need has to come from women, because it's women that are having these lived experiences, that experience the discrimination and know how it impacts them, and are able to say what they would like to happen about it. Which means also we have to work on that statistic of very few women being in the parliament, or very few women being in power. Now, it's very hard to encourage people into national government, but what we can do in our own classrooms is ask women, do they want to step up and take a leadership role? Can we assign them a task, some responsibility that will then build their confidence, that will allow them to feel competent as human beings within a community and within their language use? Outside of the classroom, can we look at the balance of power in management of men and women? Are women who are making policies about the education actually highly represented? Do we have enough women on those teams? Or are we having men make education policies about women? Look for equity over equality. We talk a lot about equality, and we argue that equality is the goal. Equality is not necessarily the goal. It can be the long-term goal in that we want everyone to be able to have an equal standing. But when it comes to access, we need to prioritize equity. And that might be different for the men and women in your classroom. Women might need more support, need more opportunities. We might start to look at things like positive discrimination. But that might also mean what one woman needs is not what another woman needs. Humans are not cookie cutters. We're not little gingerbread people. Right? We have very diverse needs. So while one woman might need an extra 5 hours of input from you, or might need more homework on something, another one might be absolutely fine and not need anything else. So in order to get to equality, we have to push for equity and giving people exactly what they need in order for them to advance, and in order to remove those discriminations and those barriers to a full and balanced educational and social civic life. Which means also we need to teach life skills. Do not leech your life skills from people. Teach some life skills. So this means when we're talking in our classrooms, when we're having discussions and debates, and we're teaching actual practical language, when we're often teaching chunked language and phrases, teach women how to be assertive in certain situations. We know that often women get talked over in meetings, they get cut off. Teach women how to say, no, I was not finished. Or I think you interrupted me. Or how to command a firm tone that is assertive and clear, that shows the conviction that they have when they speak. It shouldn't take a particular model of speech in order for women to be listened to, but we know that it does. And until we reach that true equality, we have to keep pushing the women in our classrooms in cultivating and developing these particular skills. And then one that is not necessarily an ELT thing, but I think is something that anyone within any community of practice should do, is teach yourself to recognize the signs of abuse. Look for the women who might need help in that case. Look for changes in behavior. Look for physical signs. And then find a way to offer help to that woman. Now, what that help might be is going to be different dependent on your own context and the way in which your institution works, your own cultural standards. And something that I think ties into this is make sure your classrooms are safe spaces. That abuse is not going to be tolerated in those classrooms, whether that's physical violence, whether that's verbal abuse or intimidation. Create a safe space where women feel safe to take the risk, to speak out, to share their ideas, to maybe try something new. And they know that if it fails, it fails. But if it succeeds, it's wonderful. And this, of course, is only the start of what we can do. We have a very long way to go. And I know it all sounds much easier to say, oh, do this, diversify this, have a training on this. And I'm not actually saying it's easy. It's perfectly fine for me to sit here for 40 minutes and tell you, yes, we know discrimination is a problem. This is how it shows up. This is what I would like you to be able to do. And I really know it's not easy, but I think we need to chip away bit by bit. And whether that's starting with bringing in more balanced textbooks and more balanced materials, or whether that's playing with positive discrimination so that women get opportunities they otherwise would not get because of stereotypes and because of default situations. I think that's what we have to do. And with baby steps, eventually we'll get there. And maybe we're going to be with the UN prediction, and it's going to take 40 years for us to even be equal in politics. But the more of us that work on it, the quicker we're going to get to that equality. And maybe it's not going to take 40 years. Maybe we could do it in 20. But that's all from me right now. I'll leave you here a couple of ways to contact me. And I'm looking forward to your questions and comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That was absolutely packed full of information. I'm sure that some questions will start coming in now. So there's lots and lots of messages of thanks already from people in the group. I
can see the chat counter going up. I didn't have a chance to look at it, so
don't worry. We've been answering questions when we could. But if anyone has any specific questions on the content, on teaching, then please ask Elizabeth about them now. I guess I've got a first question for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
You started as a teacher, as an ELT teacher as well. So how did you get interested in this kind of really very specific area of human rights?
I actually went the other way around.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I once upon a time, many moons ago, thought I'll become a lawyer.
Mm.
Being an ELT teacher was never, being any kind of teacher actually was never my plan. But I ended up reading politics for my undergraduate. And then I took a master in law, which is where I really honed my focus on gender and human rights. And I always thought then I would go to work in NGOs. And I was one of those people that thought I'll go into ELT for a little bit. And I fell in love with teaching way back 15 years ago.
I'm sure lots of people who are watching this can fully understand that.
But I'm at heart also still like a political sociologist. So this is why a lot of my research looks at gender and minorities within ELT, because for me, and it might sound a little hyperbolic and a little cliche, but I genuinely believe in the value of education as a transformative force and something that actually can vastly improve society and really genuinely save lives in some cases.
Great. So you perfectly managed to combine your kind of initial interest with your teaching career. That's great.
Yeah.
If someone doesn't have that background, is this something that would you recommend places where people could go and read about it, can kind of start with the basics?
And it depends what your particular interest is. There are some great books available now on things like making inclusive materials, if that's the aspect that interests you. Or there's a wonderful book for diverse teachers. It's called Diverse Teachers, Diverse. I can see the cover, but I can't see the title. I will, however, add the title in the summary sheet that I'm going to send to Paul, so you'll be able to all look it up there.
Great.
But also things like the Diverse Educators Conference events are great for getting involved in. You don't have to speak, go and listen, but really pick up a book about something that interests you. No one is ever perfect when they do this. Like, we all make mistakes, no matter how long we've been doing it for. So if you're interested, even just begin with a Google search, how to make my classroom more inclusive. It's a great little baby step. But also like search out people who work in this field and start a communication with them. I think that's a really great way, because I genuinely find that people who are interested in research or in like a passion topic like this, they're always happy to share their ideas, and they'll share their resources, and they'll tell you, oh, like, go look up this article, or here's this wonderful recording on YouTube. You can go check that out. And then
that's really good advice.
Just sometimes even jump in and go, I don't know what the situation in my location is. Let me find out, and do even a little bit of your own action research. I think that's a great way. And then even if you don't end up doing anything with it, you still have more knowledge than you began with. Although I would say if you do some action research, definitely try and put it out into the community with either a publication or a conference or something, because who doesn't love more information?
Yeah, that's really great advice. And just starting those conversations with the other teachers that are in the staff room, many of which will be female, and talking to your students, I suppose, is a good place to start. Well, thank you, Elizabeth. We do have some questions now in the Q&A. Vika asks, how can we help girls in the classroom who don't believe they can achieve great success? Maybe girls that haven't had a positive stereotype.
I think one thing that you can do is actually show role models. If you can find someone who comes from a very similar cultural background to them, or someone who had maybe not very auspicious beginnings, and show that person as a model that, look, this person didn't used to be able to do anything, but here's what they've become. I think that gives them something to aim for. It starts the thinking. But I would also say lots of positive reinforcement and encouragement and praise. Like, I'm a big fan of like hyping up the praise, actually with any learner, so that they feel some sense of achievement. Like, even if it's a small thing, even if they manage to just very meekly, quietly whisper a tiny little answer in class, give them some encouragement and praise, and slowly you'll start to see them come out of themselves. And if it's not working, sometimes find a moment for a one-on-one with that student. Say, okay, I've noticed you're a little shy. Like, what do you need from me? What would help you feel more comfortable? And that maybe that child or that woman needs to sit at the back of a classroom where they don't feel all eyes on them, and they might feel more confident speaking from there because everyone else is looking in the other direction. So ask that person also what's going to benefit them, and just keep trying. Eventually, something's going to stick.
Yeah, that's good advice. Maybe they haven't had that encouraging teacher in their life before. So yeah, start with all that praise. Rosa asks, can you please repeat the difference between equity and equality? And she says, thank you in advance. We know you mentioned that at the start of the webinar, but I guess it is a key concept that people really want to take away.
It is. So the short version is equality is treating everybody the same. Equity is giving people what they need to get them to the same position. So they're interlinked ideas. There's a really great little meme picture of this that I wish I had to hand. I unfortunately don't. Of people standing on boxes to watch a baseball game. So tall person can stay over the fence. They don't need anything. A shorter person needs one box. But giving an even shorter person one box still won't help. But if you give them two, they're all equally able to see, but the equity is in giving them different things.
Okay. Yeah, I think I've seen that meme.
Yeah, I can add this in also to the post notes as well. I'll make a note for myself to add that in, so everyone can grab that.
That would be really, really good. Yeah, I can picture that. So it might be giving a little bit more support, or doing a needs analysis to find out what people want in the class.
And that can be like a really simple thing, like if you've got a really busy working parent who needs an extra week to do an assignment, give them that week.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of like, what does it matter at the end of the day? Okay, yes, it's technically not fair, but it's equitable. Because then if another student needs something else later down the line, you're going to then give them that thing that they need, right? And the equality comes in getting everyone to the same point and the same finish line. So if our finish line as teachers is getting them to graduate from a particular level or graduate a program, then the equity is giving them the tools they need to be able to all do that and walk away with that equal qualification.
Great. I can see lots of applause in the chat, lots of thank yous. Yeah, lots of people agree with you here. There's a very interesting question from Veridiana. I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name. From the other side, how can we teach boys about the importance of women and teach them to empower women? Yeah, it's a big question.
A really wonderful question, and it is a very big question. Wow.
You mentioned materials earlier on.
In materials, definitely. And I think that critical thinking also helps. But I think this is something we need to start with basic primary education as well. But I think this is something we're almost less able to do as educators because this is a big social problem. This requires educators across the board to say, okay, look, here's a woman. She is a valid human being. Pay no attention to the horrible slander you hear on the internet. And I think the only thing we can do is keep showing, again, positive role models and equal role models. And then when we meet those negative ideas and opinions, employ that critical thinking and go, okay, I hear what you're saying. Tell me why. And that might be hard for us in the moment because we might be really enraged with this nonsense or really discriminatory idea that we've got. But then we just need to breathe and go, okay, explain. Let's work through this. And let's see if we can get to like a better position where I can say, well, maybe what you think is not the case, and where maybe you can see that, this is a valuable thing. It is a challenge for sure.
Yeah, and I suppose that if the learners are quite young, then that's a conversation you could have in L1, because it's an important conversation to have, isn't it? Yeah. And something occurred to me, if our textbooks don't have those role models, we can just change the activity and say we're going to research an inventor who's a woman. We're not going to use the textbook page about the inventor who's a man.
Is a guide, we don't have to go through it page by page. If you're getting the target language or grammar across, then switch out the material or switch out the visual, that's fine. And nowadays, I think we have so many tools to do this with all the online platforms we have. If you're in a position where you have a decent, stable internet connection that you can use those things, then you can run a whole interactive lesson without even having to look at the silly things in the textbook. And you can just customize that topic with your own more equal and equitable materials. And if you don't have that facility, then just, if you can find 1 or 2 images beforehand and say, okay, we're going to talk about this thing, but we'll look at this image that I've stuck on the board with a bit of blue tack. Hold it up in front of you. You don't even need a board.
So Google an image of a girl playing baseball and a girl.
Other search engines are available, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. Let's see what else we have in the chat. Alexandra asks, have you got any recommendations of materials that are better in terms of female representation?
I mean, I think better would probably depend on me knowing exactly which books you're working with.
Yeah, because teachers might be bound to the textbooks in their country.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the mainstream ones are all much of a muchness. I would say, honestly, the best way to do it yourself. I know publishers hate it when you say things like that, but it's true. I think some things like the National Geographic books are pretty decent, actually. I think that's because they're National Geographic and they're also aimed at like exploring cultures. So they're already a little more diversity minded. If you can get your hands on those, that might be nice. Otherwise, do the best you can. And if you really can't do anything about changing the context or change the images, if you don't have any resources and you have a really strict department, honestly, go for the conversation aspect and push that critical thinking and discussion. Because that's really going to promote encouragement and like engagement, and keeping that safe space where it's comfortable for people to do that, I think, will really help.
Well, just while you were speaking, I looked up that we have a resource.
I just saw a load of stuff.
I just remembered about this, so I posted into the chat some lessons that kind of explore the theme of, for example, women in male careers, Dua Lipa, celebrities, and advice to women. There's some interesting things there.
Usually, when it comes to like either this time of year or when it comes to women in STEM, there's a lot of materials that get made, and you can teach them at any time of the year. So keep an eye, I would say, on places like the British Council websites and other big teaching websites, and see. And
STEM is science, technology. Remind me of the other two.
Science, technology, engineering, and
maths. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
An interesting question. It's about your opinion. It's from Maria Josepa, and she says she would like to believe that Europe has moved away from most of these attitudes. What's your say on this? What's your take on this? You're in Turkey at the. You live in Turkey, don't you?
But as a Brit, like, I know, I don't think we have, honestly. In fact, I think we're having a slide backwards across actually a large amount of Europe in terms of women's rights and rights for other minorities as well. We're seeing it across gender, sexuality, migration. I think, I say across Europe, I feel like actually globally we're having a much more conservative turn. And we got so far forward, and now we seem to be regressing back again. And I think I'm just waiting for the pendulum to swing back, because on paper, we do have more opportunities, we do. But socially, in terms of the way women are respected and valued, I think misogyny is rising rapidly day by day. And we're in this very awkward position where people are saying, we don't need feminism anymore. Look, you can vote, you can work, you can do all of these things. But we still can't do things like walk safely down the street.
Yeah, you mentioned at the start that I think that the UN goal was 2030. Is that right?
For the current Sustainable Development Goals, yes.
Yeah. Are you optimistic about that?
No, neither are the UN actually. They do a progress report every now and again, and some goals are really doing well. Equality is making some progress forward for gender equality, but it's not on target even by their standards. So I don't think we're going to be there yet. But also, because these are sustainable goals, the deadline is 2030. But the idea is to continue with that trend onwards. So although I think we probably will miss it, maybe a few more years down the line, we're going to get there.
Okay, well, you mentioned training is a big part of it. So one thing I would like to mention now that our moderators have put in the chat, a link to join a 4-week free online course by the British Council. It's called Gender in Language Education. So there's a link there. Everyone can register for free. It's a self-access course that also has a Facebook group to discuss lots of issues. So we hope to see some people there. We're coming to the end of our time, Elizabeth. I've really enjoyed listening to your presentation, and I've really enjoyed talking to you here at the end. We're going to have a 15-minute break soon, and then we'll start session 3 of today. That is with Dr. van der Vianne and Dr. Ashleen O'Boyle, and they're going to talk about their project, Gendering ELT, what